stream to the public schools of Rappahannock. Asking that question, and you're the chairman of the Rappahannock County, Foundation for Public Education. It's hard to say it's really not my issue. So it's become my issue. And the first thing we're going to do and we've had a month basically to get up to speed on this, but we are going to start a series of 3 public conversations called Funding Our Future, conversation about funding public education in Rappahannock. The first one's going to happen next Thursday night, and then 2 weeks later there'll be a second one, and then 2 weeks later there'll be a third one. And the timing of these is not just coincidentally around the budget cycle. Our task, our goal, is to see that as many people in Rappahannock begin to understand the real issues. That when you say LCI, they don't glaze. You say ADM, they don't look away. When you talk about income inequities, when you talk about funding strategies and matrices and all the rest of it, when you talk about legislation out of Richmond, like no harm, that people begin to understand this is critical. If we want a really good public school system, we're going to have to become better educated citizens. You can't just say, well, raise the taxes. That's not the answer for anybody. It's certainly not the answer for families with kids in school. So this is our first step. We're going to try a way of getting information to the public. We were really ready to roll until we realized that the governor's order restricts attendance for school board or for board of supervisors or churches or even some other things. So we are struggling right now to try and figure out how to make this as interactive and participatory as possible. We hope we can get it recorded so it's available. We hope we can Zoom it so people at least can tune in. Our goal, though, is to make it possible for people who are at home via Zoom to ask questions, have comments, whatever. So that's right now our next challenge. But there'll be these 3 meetings. I think you've gotten a notice already. The first one is going to be the ABCs of building the budget. And we already know that Dr. Grimsley and we believe Mr. Curry will help the public get a little better understanding of really what are the pieces from both sides that have to go into these budgets. The second one will be funding challenges. And that's going to look at those things we really don't have a lot of control over, principally the LCI. Now we may be able to get a little traction on how the 50% real estate is computed. We probably can't do anything about income, and we can't do anything at all about sales taxes. But if we could move some of the numbers that we report legitimately on real estate, it could begin to budge the LCI, which would be a help. But there are other challenges. SOQs, I don't think people realize that you as a board and the superintendent don't have much discretion really when you start building this budget. You start with the essentials that you have to provide. You use the funding that you know you'll get. And then the tough work happens. What do you do with what remains that's critical and important, and what's the top priorities? And then the last one will be funding excellence on the 14th of April. That one's going to say, look, if we really want an excellent school system, we're already a good school system. But if we want to be able to say we're one of the finest in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and there's no reason why Rappahannock with its wealth shouldn't be able to say that, then what would it take to create a true partnership between the school board, board of supervisors, and the community, the private sector, to create in the future a more reliable, steady stream? And I don't want to be misunderstood. This is not about increasing the contribution to the school budget that comes from county taxes. It might be about getting the supervisors and the school board together in a united front to take a more proactive stance towards Richmond, rather than being, this is all we've got, what do we make, how do we make do? So we're going to try and change the focus from how do we balance budgets to how do we fund a quality public education system. We may not be able to do that, but this looks like a good time to try. And if there's substantial private support for new, untried ways to make additional private dollars available to the school, I would never want to say, well, you didn't pursue that opportunity. So we're going to start out on this. We hope to have hundreds of people who are more involved than they ever have been before. We hope that those folks who tell us they're ready to step up and maybe make some significant gifts, I'll hold them accountable. I hope you'll help me hold them accountable. But maybe in a couple of months, we'll be able to say that moving forward to next year's budget cycle, we're going to have a more optimistic, a more positive outlook than trying to figure out how do we balance a school budget. So that's the plan. Thank you for your support. It will happen in this room, these 3 meetings. And we appreciate the graphic, your very own Holly Jenkins. We appreciate the support of the Rappahannock News and MedRap and all the other partners in the county who are going to help us try and make this a success. But this is going to be different. This is not about scholarships. This is not about a one-off gift. This is really about changing the conversation, changing the attitude and the expectations of people in Rappahannock around the institution of education. So that's our goal. So thank you all, and I hope we'll have more good news to tell you in the future.
So Headwaters has routinely, historically, helped with the education of the public around the budget in the past. And so I'm hoping that this is a part of that.
Well,
and,
my face is familiar, certainly to some of the supervisors, that I don't think there's been an issue in recent memory that involved support for the schools that somebody didn't get to hear me. So that's going to continue both personally, but Headwaters, part of our mandate is advocacy around school issues, but also advocacy in support of school budgets. Now that doesn't mean that if you ask for the moon and you don't deserve it, that Headwaters wouldn't independently review that before stepping up and endorsing it. I said several years ago, before I was on Headwaters, before I was on the town council in Washington, I'm not going to spend $1 until I'm sure the public schools are spending every dollar they get wisely. Fortunately, a superintendent showed up who began a process of budget construction, became transparent, and convinced me that if I did my homework and worked through every number in that school budget, I was hard-pressed to find any fat or wasted dollars. So starting with that beginning, I began to be a more involved, educated, and vocal advocate, because I myself have always been involved in education all through my life, either teacher, student, son of a college professor, whatever you want. I'm convinced that education is the single least expensive way for the public to achieve good. Every kid you educate, especially in this county where we're doing whole education for whole life, think about the social benefits of $1 invested in a 4-year-old's preschool education. The research is abundant. We can spend billions on the tail end when things go south. I guess I can't say that here. When things go sideways. But you'd be an idiot not to realize that in the United States of America for a long time, $1 put into public education is probably the single best invested dollar the public has ever spent. So I have no trouble coming up with the rationale or the evidence or the research. The problem is when budgets are tight and you're competing with other important public ends, and you sort of think it's a zero-sum game, it's a single pie. So every time on that chart, the school budget gets a little bit bigger, somebody else's slice gets a little bit smaller. And we all live here together, we all know everybody wants the public good. I'd like to find a way to make the pie bigger so that we don't have to have these really hard, difficult conversations about, well, who gets cut? So that's kind of where we're headed.
So this particular forum, just so we're clear before we jump to any conclusions, there's 3 sessions. They're going to happen here. They're all virtual, right?
There will be panelists, sort of like you guys, so we'll have some live bodies, and we'll fill the other remaining seats so that there are some live people here, kind of like tonight.
Okay, so there will be people here, and people that are online or people that are here are going to be, after the briefings are done, there's going to be briefings, and then there's going to be a Q&A time.
There'll be a presentation.
Yep.
There'll be a panel. Together that should take 30 to 40 minutes, and then we hope to have 20 minutes for each of those for questions or for comment.
Okay.
So some kind of public engagement.
Okay, just making sure.
Now, for anyone who's here, that would be easy. What our concern is, how do we connect people at home? Now, I know that the Board of Supervisors has figured that out. So the technology, at least at the courthouse and for the Board of Supervisors, exists so they can do that. Whether we can get that set up by next Thursday, I'm not sure. I'm not sure you guys have it here tonight that you could do a Zoom meeting where somebody at home could talk to you live. We're looking into that.
Well, we did that originally during COVID when we weren't allowed to be together. But
Yeah, we're pursuing those technical questions. We hope to be able to get to that.
Are there any other questions before we move on?
I guess I'm a little confused. I see that Mr. Curry's going to be here for the first, and Dr. Grimsley for the first session, and I would assume would be the people who are answering questions if they come in from the public. In the second and third session, who's going to be the experts in that process?
Well, we hope the people on the panel have done some homework, and we hope the presenters have some background. Now, in terms of experts,
I understand that.
we're not really expecting this to be about experts. We're expecting this more to be about raising awareness of what some...
I understand, but if you have questions, then you're required to have, or not required to, but one would expect you to have answers for those questions.
Well, the panel discussion too is structured in a way, and we've been collaborating on panelists that make sense for those certain meeting nights. But they will be composed to, get the discussion going, and then a short time afterwards for question and answer from the public if there are any. But I'll be present, and so we'll head ours to each of these. So.
These will be almost all community members who have, in some way in the last 10 years, paid attention and are, to the extent that anyone pays attention and comes to your meetings and listens to endless briefings and goes to supervisor meetings. They will be the ones who will be talking, and I would think that most of them could answer questions rather quickly about the things they've addressed. These aren't like experts in the sense that they don't hold any public office, they're not seeking any public office, they're just community members discussing with other community members issues that concern us. Now that might not be ideal, and obviously if there are technical questions that come up, we would have to get answers for those and make them available. This is more a lateral conversation. Giving people who are interested and don't quite during COVID, how do we have this conversation? It is not so much a briefing from somebody who's an expert to somebody who isn't. Now, there are other ways to get this done, and I'm not saying this is the best way.
That's it.
Well, or the ability to defer.
Or defer the answer until you come back.
Yeah. A lot of times it takes research.
Well, a lot of this, we're looking for the right questions because we're not sure exactly what the whole answer is, and that's the point, is to really just engage in a community dialogue about here's what we're facing, here's the challenges, here's the possible structures that are barriers, so what do we think about that? What's your barriers? What are you thinking about? We do have some expertise coming on the 14th. I don't know if I can let it out of the bag, but if you don't mind. But yeah, Keith Kerrigan, for instance, our president of CoSTARS, is going to be coming in for that last one to say what he's been doing, advocating for rural schools in Richmond and where we can help support. So it's conversations like that, just to make us aware of what's available, what's a good strategy, and it's not really about having the answers to tell anybody. We don't know what that is, but we want to engage in a community conversation about, okay, we're at a point where we should be talking about this together and coming up with a sustainable way to move forward without having to come back every year and just being like, okay, we've got to go this time. What program are we cutting now?
Right.
So those are the conversations to have. But we're not telling anybody what to do. It's just
Well,
educating about the educational components that we're dealing with.
We're sort of time pressed too, but we could certainly share with you, Mr. Grove, who some of the panelists are and what the panels are. And if you think there's somebody that you're aware of who's expert, who should be included in those conversations, we can either add them to a panel or we can make sure that they're invited and try and get them here that night.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It'd be good to see the panels. Once you get them together.
We just sort of the request, can you come and be with us? And
Right.
they're trickling in. And I'm pleased to say that I haven't had anybody reject the ones I've contacted. But yeah, we may not be able to